Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our last, but definitely not least, in fact, very, very far from it, IEO talk for the year. And we're really privileged to have Dr. Juha Uitto, who is the head of the Independent Evaluation Office at the Green Climate. I feel And so of all the people in this room, the person that I have known longest is Juha. Yeah. Juha, I'd worked for about 5 years at the World Bank, and I needed to move up to New York for personal reasons. And one of the people that I ended up working with was Juha, who was then at the UNDP GEF office of UNDP. So we go back many, many, many years. And since then, Juha ended up being, went on to be Deputy Director also at the UNDP Independent Evaluation Office, and then moved about 5 years ago to 4 years ago to the Independent Evaluation of the Global Environment Facility. So Juha has had an incredible career and continues to have one. Juha has two-thirds Japanese, I like to say, and also has worked at UNU, so has had and always worn very comfortably an academic hat as well as an operational hat, something that we can all aspire to. And is still very active in the academic community with geographers and economists, and has a very healthy irreverence of, the establishment in general. And I hope that will shine through, I think, also from his presentation. So today, Juha is here to talk about not just the independent evaluation of the but also the OPS6, so the comprehensive evaluation of the GEF that the IEO at GEF leads every 4 years, coinciding with replenishment of the GEF. So in that sense, this talk by Juha today is really timely for us because, as you all know, the IEU, the Independent Evaluation Unit, has been asked by the board to lead the performance review of the GCF. And I will be talking about this somewhat briefly at the staff meeting later today, so you'll get to hear about it. So for us, it's really timely to have this talk. Juha's also going to be talking about some of the innovation that they're doing at the Independent Evaluation Office and his worldviews at large. Before I hand over the mic to Juha, just some rules of the game that I think most of you are familiar with now. Juha will speak for about 25 minutes, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. We'll go for a total period of about an hour, so we intend to close by 1:30. Like I said, Juha is our last speaker this year, so he's, our speaker for December. We have these monthly talks, and so because Juha could only come in today and not later, so we decided to have 2 talks in November, but Juha is essentially our December featured speaker. And then we'll open the year again in January with an announcement on our next talk towards the end of January, which will be made in early January. So we look forward to having you all there. But also I wanted to take this occasion to wish you all a very happy New Year and happy holidays. So with that, over to you, Juha. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is this fun? I'm sorry, my voice is a little bit down, but it's slightly better than it was yesterday. Thank you, Joe, very much for the introduction. And as I'm the last speaker and the December speaker, so surely I can go until tomorrow. Then comes to that. 25 minutes will be speeding through a lot of stuff, but I'll put on my stopwatch to start with. Yeah, so the GEF in the changing environmental finance landscape was actually the theme of the comprehensive evaluation that we did completed just a few months ago. And the justification, well, this is
What?
Justification for it is that GEF is, as you will probably all of you know, so I don't have to spend much time on it, but GEF is the first one of these public environmental financial mechanisms, and it was established already in 1991 in anticipation of the Rio Earth Summit and the understanding that there will be increasing needs for financial flows to the Rio conventions and so forth. So we were initially established as a financial mechanism for the Convention on Biodiversity and the Framework Convention on Climate Change. But since then, the GEF has become, the mandate has grown, and we are now financial mechanism to, in addition to these, to the UN Land Degradation Convention, the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants, and the Minamata Convention on Mercury. So we are serving currently 5 conventions as a financial mechanism. And so it's had about 27 years of operational history. So there's a little bit of experience on how the GEF works. We have an independent evaluation. I was actually in the GEF secretariat in the late 90s, also in Washington before, for personal reasons. I also migrated north to New York and found employment at UNDP. At that point of time, there was only a monitoring and evaluation unit in the secretariat where I worked. In 2004, it was the evaluation office was established, and then a couple of years later, renamed the independent evaluation office. And this is from the GEF instrument, the foundational document of the GEF, that there shall be an independent evaluation office headed by a director appointed by and reporting to the council. The council is our board. So that's what I'm doing now. But the point here is maybe really that it is a very strongly established function and constitutional part of the GEF constellation. And one of our fundamental things that we have to do is this comprehensive evaluation of the GEF, which is done, like Joe already said, every 4 years in anticipation of the replenishment process. And it's actually it's considered one of the 2 foundational documents that inform the replenishment process. So there's the GEF Secretariat, of course, like you have, and the Secretariat leads the preparation of the policy agenda and programming directions for the next 4-year period. And the other document is then the comprehensive evaluation that the Council and the replenishment participants consider for, when they decide on how much or what the programming directions and policy agenda should be for the next 4 years, what are the new foci and directions, and how much money should be put into each of these focal areas, as we call them. So it's indeed, we spent quite a lot of time in conducting the comprehensive evaluation, and we call it OPS. I mean, doesn't make any sense, but they used to be overall performance studies before we really got into a broader framework of doing solid evaluations. So the OPS stuck. So this is already the sixth OPS, but the comprehensive evaluation. In doing this evaluation, we conducted 29 separate evaluations and studies that informed the OPS itself. And these range broadly from we do performance and impact at portfolio level and focal area level, slicing and dicing countries, regions, and so forth. And that's, of course, the most important part of this. But we also do organizational evaluations and studies, such as, gender mainstreaming, indigenous peoples, social and environmental safeguards, and so forth. And this time, for the first time, also a fairly large study on the governance of the GEF. And this whole thing was put into this perspective of that, where is GEF now? That is no longer the only kid on the block, that there's actually GCF. You heard of that? And many others. There are climate investment funds and adaptation fund and you name it. There's a lot of mechanisms now, and we are not even the largest anymore. I should say that the replenishment was completed very successfully in a very difficult financial and political landscape, and the new period started from July 1st this year. And 29 donors contributed $4.1 billion to the trust fund. It was quite good because there were much worse scenarios, not least because of what has happened in the United States. And the United States indeed did cut their funding by 50% to us, but other countries in Europe and Japan, even China, compensated for this loss of income. So we did this comprehensive evaluation. We visited, these are all countries that we visited during the course of the evaluation, either as a country study per se or as case study countries for the 29 evaluations that constituted the and we looked into the performance and impact, found that GEF continues to have a fairly good overall outcome ratings, and these are based on terminal evaluations of completed projects, which, by the way, are conducted by the agencies that implement the projects, and we do some amount of quality assurance and setting standards and so on, but we are not in charge of the project evaluations. And there's 18 agencies that conduct the GEF projects. So 79% satisfactory outcomes. This is, depending, of course, you'll always get somebody who thinks that, the glass is half empty. But my position would be that this is extraordinarily good performance, actually. And if you go to a Silicon Valley startup, and if they get 15% success rate, they are really, really lucky, actually. But these ratings have gone up over the years, and which implies that the GEF is a learning organization. And the evaluation function, I believe, has played a key role in it becoming such a learning organization. All of our evaluations are reported to the council, and then there is of course a management response. But the council then takes the decision on recommendations. What are the final recommendations? Of course, they usually take almost everything that we recommend, but sometimes with modifications. And then there's a tracking mechanism which we are responsible for, and we report back to the council once a year on the implementation status of the agreed recommendations. So there's this kind of a built-in feedback loop which ensures that evaluations are feeding directly into policy making and program development and program implementation. We look also, of course, to not only the outcome ratings at the end of the project, but also things as, of course, sustainability of these actions, but also then broader adoption and transformational change as defined, as you know, whether the project benefits are mainstreamed or replicated or scaled up, and whether these projects lead to market changes and policy changes that can then carry over for a longer period of time. Okay, I don't have to go into this. A few words of climate change. And climate change is actually, as I said, it was one of the two original areas where the GEF was working, but now we have five areas or 6 areas if you count sustainable forest management. And because almost all of these other new financial mechanisms like GCF are climate focused, we are emphasizing more the natural resources management and the integrated ecosystem management and so forth. So the biodiversity, land, forest, water have become a more important stream than climate change for us now. But climate change obviously has been around for a long time. And there has been a clear evolution in the strategy and going more from the two foci on energy efficiency and renewable energy to again more into these market transformations, policy work and integrated work. Urban centers are important, but also in general linking climate change to issues such as land and forest management and carbon sinks and so forth. But we still do, well, this is basically what I said, we still do energy efficiency and renewable energy, but also then agriculture and forest management are important aspects of our approach to climate and urban transport and urban systems in general. Again, the performance ratings are about the same as in other areas. Yeah. But really, what the strategy has become is to be more focused on integrated approaches and less on specific technologies and so forth. I will skip this. I would have a lot of examples from projects in especially we did an impact evaluation of mitigation work in China, India, Mexico, and Russia. But you can read it online, maybe. So what we found in this evaluation that the GEF continues to be highly relevant to the UNFCCC mandate and so on. But really where the GEF comparative advantage seems to be is really in this on the in the area of enabling environment. We don't have the money to invest in large, in projects on technology or something like that. But what we can do, we have a, good ability to work with governments and increasingly with private sector to try to change policy and legislative and regulatory frameworks so that they are climate friendly. So we think that our niche areas in this focal area are exactly what I'm saying, that upstream approaches to policy reform and to accelerate market development and so forth, risk sharing approaches and piloting, and of course there is then an attempt to collaborate with other climate funds and MDBs, and I believe our management is in constant discussions with GCF also about our respective roles and how we could enhance that. Then a few words about our evaluation approaches, because I'm quite proud to say that I think that we have innovated in some cases. For example, I took this area of land degradation and value for money because there's two issues that are relevant to us, I think. And this is just a portfolio. It's 618 projects that we looked at, total funding about $24 billion over the years. Many of them in Africa, but also in other regions. Here are all the projects which we mapped. Actually, this was the first important and challenging thing, because many of the projects documentation doesn't have geocoding, and they don't have the geographical location. So we had to spend quite a lot of time to put these maps together to allow us to start, seeing various factors. I mean, you can use it already for just, seeing whether the project locations correspond to the important areas where, scientific and other assessments have said that we have the problems. But I'll show you some further stuff how we use this mapping. Again, just performance thing. But we looking into the impacts of the land degradation portfolio and using mixed methods. And we have been, I think, one of the evaluation offices to pioneer the use of geospatial technologies and pioneer the use of remote sensing in these kind of things. But so that helps us to quantify what happened, and also in cases where there is no baseline, for example. So here's in southern India, there's a bamboo forest where GEF worked, and we looked at satellite imagery before and after, and you can see in the green area that the bamboo has grown back very nicely in the areas. You can actually quantify land use, land cover change, vegetation, productivity, and so on, using remote sensing. And then, of course, you will have to triangulate this with other methods, and including the field work and discussions and interviews with the stakeholders at different levels to understand what else happened in this period. But then we went a step further again here and did what was called a value for money assessment. So the whole evaluation started with the geocoding, using the geospatial data, integrating data from different sources, doing a matching analysis, causal tree analysis, and then valuation of carbon sequestration in these land degradation projects. So we did quasi-experimental studies at the field level where we used statistical and other methods, to find best match controls for projects which were in similar sites when it comes to precipitation, temperature, elevation, roads, urban centers, and so forth. And then we did multiple causal tree analyses of the factors that actually correlated, and we had to do it multiple times so that to compensate for the limitations in the data. But we could actually come to some interesting conclusions here. So what we basically measured was vegetation, productivity, forest loss, and land fragmentation, and found things such as that access to electricity was associated with higher impact on the ground, presumably because of access to irrigation. And there were obviously higher impact, faster change observed in areas where the initial conditions were poor, and that makes sense also. You can make a bigger difference in a shorter time. And then one of the factors that the donors definitely did not like was the fact that there's obviously a huge time lag between your project and seeing the actual change on the ground, the environmental change. So we estimated that it's about. So we looked at these 618 projects, and on the average, it's about 5 years after the project completion. That is about 10 years after the project starts, when you actually start seeing significant changes on the ground. So it's a reality check for the donors of what to expect. But then this was interesting, this value for money. So what we did, again, took all of the 618 projects, did the geospatial analysis before and after, seeing where vegetation productivity and forest change, either positively or negatively, how much. Then, using academic literature, we would use an average value for how much a certain kind of land cover sequesters carbon, and also then economic literature to see what is estimated average price of carbon per ton. So this allowed us to actually to quantify the carbon benefits of GEF's land degradation projects. And this was actually quite interesting, and both the council and the management liked it because it helped them to show that they actually have co-benefits and climate benefits to projects which are focusing on natural resources management. So the carbon benefits were just above $1 return to each GEF dollar invested, and this is of course on top of the main benefits of the projects. We could do similar analysis for many other things, so socio-economic benefits, even if you so wish, but it's just laborious to do, so we haven't done it. So we figured that the carbon sequestration was an issue that was most interesting at this stage. Self-explanatory, but basically some recommendations that we came up with from the study. And maybe the most important thing is that apart from the carbon sequestration, so climate risks were seldom programmed into these projects that we had. And same with things like contextual factors such as land tenure and so on, which are known to be very important things when it comes to natural resources management. They were seldom featured explicitly in the projects. Very quickly then, another innovation, I think what we did was that so when you do evaluations, you can do it many ways, and you have a large portfolio of projects, so ideally, of course, you would look at all of them, but that you can't do. Second best might be to do a randomized, random sampling and so forth, and that's what we usually would do. In this particular case, we did a very purposeful sample, and we went to all of the 18 implementing agencies and the GEF Secretariat to nominate completed projects that they thought were particularly transformational. And we screened these projects. There was, I don't remember, less than 200 projects that were nominated, and we screened them using a systematic screening mechanism, and where we had independent evaluations of the projects that could verify that they actually qualified as transformational in terms of that they were highly relevant to global environment, that there was a depth of change, scale of change, and that the actions were sustainable. So we looked at a small number of projects in different areas and in different geographical areas and in different focal areas. And you had, for example, a Uruguay project that started developing wind power for Uruguay, which had 0% of its electricity was done in 2008 with wind power. And in 8 years later, when the GEF got out of it, 1/3 of the country's electricity was supplied by wind power, and all the policies have been changed to favor it that way. So we did a deep dive into these transformational projects and found a number of factors that were common. One was the fact that you have to design for transformation. Surprisingly, I mean, it maybe sounds self-evident also, but surprisingly many projects are there for just to do a pilot or do some technical thing for 5 years, and don't think about the broader picture enough, and don't think about the sustainability. So other things that you had, all of these projects that we looked at had either, all of them had a clearly defined mechanism for financial sustainability that would continue after the external funding. And it could be government funding, it could be private sector funding often, and often it was through changes in the market conditions that would favor environmentally sound ways of doing things. Interestingly also, we often think that you have to have a massive investment to be transformational and sustainable, but that Uruguay wind project, its budget from the GEF the grant was $950,000, and it mobilized $6 million from external sources for co-finances. So it was a project that was about $7 million over 5 years, so not much money. And our investment, indeed, I repeat, was less than $1 million. And so you can, when you are strategic and you address the issues when it comes to policy, regulatory, legal reform, and market change, So you can cause lasting transformations actually with relatively small investments. Of course, in this case, Uruguay is a very small country also, but still. Other examples would be in China, where you do small targeted pilots, and when they work, the government takes them over and replicates and scales up and so forth. So, what are our conclusions here? So, overall, the comprehensive evaluation concluded that the GEF has a long and strong history of pretty good performance. But really its strengths are the fact that it is not a one-trick pony. It's not doing only one kind of projects in one area, but the fact that it has been able to reach the different convention areas and reach the different environmental domains from, so bringing like in that land degradation and carbon sequestration example, that you do natural resources management and link it to climate, for example. So that was one of our major, perhaps our biggest sort of like chapeau conclusion from the overall performance study, that this is kind of the stuff that GEF is good at, and with its limited funding, instead of investment, so it does that, and it has been pretty good at creating enabling environments in countries through these legal and regulatory reforms. It has been trying to move more and more to work better with the private sector, but that is clearly work in progress. I mean, it hasn't really figured out its niche there fully yet, but it's also another area where there's going to be a lot more emphasis in the replenishment period that just started, and it's both working with them large multinationals on issues such as taking deforestation out of palm oil production and so forth. So working with the large-scale companies, but also with the small and medium enterprises in the country. So the palm oil, for example, I mean, goes from family farms that grow the palms to intermediaries, to multinationals and so forth. So you have to work with all of those. But really the fact that the GEF has been able to address the linkages and synergies between the focal areas. From an evaluation point of view, so why I claim that we've been rather influential in the GEF partnership. There are some factors. One is the fact that that we have been established as an independent internal unit, but who reports directly to the council. So the council gives me my marching orders, and I respond to them, and I can set the evaluation agenda freely, and I can report freely. Of course, I consult with the management, but I am not accountable to the management, and they cannot say what we should evaluate and what we should not evaluate. But we try to be very responsive to stakeholder demand, and frequently I do talk to the management and consult and ask, what would be some of these key issues that you would be interested in learning more about. Credibility comes both from the independence, but of course of the use of solid methodologies, so that you can defend your conclusions and your findings. And in this particular case, timeliness was very, very important, because we had to be at the right time for the replenishment process to be able to inform the replenishment process. And we did. But I again say that there's this inbuilt mechanism for how evaluations are fed into decision making, and how management at different levels, they don't have to agree with everything that we say. Maybe we have, I don't think so, but sometimes we might get something quite not right, but they cannot ignore the evaluation. I think that's it what I wanted to say, and everything is available. All reports, all methodologies, data sets we have, they are all public, and that's one of the important things, that they can all be found on the GEF IEO website. So please go and visit there when you have a spare moment, and any comments will be welcome. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Juha. Wonderful. That is great. Thank you very much. Let me open this up for questions. So try and keep your questions brief. Please introduce yourselves, and we do 3 questions, response, 3 questions, response, please. Ali.
And try to speak clearly. I'm a little bit stuffed head, so I can't hear very well. Yeah.
Thank you. It was quite interesting and very welcome once again in DCP. In GCF. I have a couple of questions. One of them is related with the performance and sustainability that you said in the middle income countries, and also institutional capacity challenges in African countries. So we are kind of providing them readiness support, and also like GIZ and other organizations doing it for so long. But still we are facing this kind of problems, and we keep continuing to address those issues. But what your observation and what kind of solution you could say from evaluation perspective in this regard? And one more thing is that after seeing all those kind of environmental related organizations working for so long, and there is huge demand in the ground, but I don't know, I see a lot of, as I'm working with the countries, I think it's still the interest as well as their willingness from the country is not that efficient, or it's not that that sufficient level that we can provide them that much money as well as the opportunities. So how do you see those issues, and how do you recommend kind of solutions from evaluation perspective? Thank you.
Yeah. Ali, sorry, just because I'm moderating. The first question was performance in middle-income countries with respect to the objectives.
Sure.
You spoke about.
And
Okay.
Africa, yeah.
And in Africa, yeah. And so?
Two brief questions. Thanks for the excellent presentation. One is with respect to investment and policies, government policies. It's my understanding GEF does a lot of investment supporting enabling environment policies. And what kind of support or concrete big investment did GEF did to change the enabling environment? Second point I have is the time lag in achieving benefit from such kind of investment. And that's the major reason with natural resource management and land degradation project that the adoption rate is often low because the benefit comes later. Is there any overwhelming incentive structure that was put in place? And if you could comment on that to compensate for that time lag in benefits.
Dimitri?
Yeah, Dimitri from the Station Division.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, we're recording everyone, so please know that, and so please speak into the mic.
Maybe I'm asking you a weird question, but in a world where there is an independent evaluation of the independent evaluation of the GEF, what do you think would be the main recommendation to you, and maybe the main recommendation that you can share with the independent evaluation unit of the GCF?
Okay, so let me see some of them. Yeah, this sustainability and the institutional capacity issue is something that is really very of high interest to the governing council, especially, and everybody. So we saw that if you had a outcome ratings at the satisfactory range at 79% and the sustainability ratings at 63% of, so there's a gap, obviously, and then when you break it down and you can see that the sustainability is much higher when you work in Mexico and Brazil and South Africa and China than when you work in LDCs and SIPs. So the council actually, when they saw this thing, so they asked us to look into more detail on what it depends on, and we did actually a comparator analysis. We looked into what, for example, multilateral development banks, IFAD and so on had found in their evaluations, and it's exactly the same. And the actually the ratings, I mean the percentages are almost the same. So this kind of a 60% positive rating on sustainability in Africa is pretty par for the course. So obviously, I mean, you have issues such as the institutional capacity in general and the financial capacity of whoever wants to continue the project benefits afterwards. So what can you do about it? There was, in the past especially, there was big reluctance from the donor side to invest in capacity development, because they said that, okay, no, we need fast results on the environment and let somebody else do the capacity development. So GEF shouldn't waste its money on that. But I think there has been a policy change in that sense that we have to invest in the institutional capacity and make sure that every project that when it's reviewed for funding, that it has taken this into account, that 5 years later it doesn't come as a surprise that okay, so who's going to take this over now? And you have cases where it's really at that level where you don't know which agency or ministry even would be in charge afterwards. You were asking about the demand from countries, right? And yeah, it varies, and it varies greatly. And of course, I remember one mission I made to a Southern African LDC, and I went to talk to the Ministry of Agriculture, and he said that I hear you, Mr. Uitto. The environment is very important, but it hasn't rained in our country for now 3 years, and the soil is dry, and the wells are drying, and you have to dig for water from deeper and deeper, and because we don't have energy, so our farmers cut down the trees to burn, and so we have so urgent problems here that we can't afford to think about the environment. And I'm like, but that is the environment. So there's, I'm afraid that there's a little bit of that we northern NGO characters have, tainted environment with the images that that the monkeys are more important than the people. And this is a perception that we are trying to change also, so that these environmental issues are actually fundamental livelihood issues and economic issues as well. And there's a market shift in GEF programming towards that direction also, and also to addressing explicitly the drivers of environmental change, and not only what happens with it, but whether it is economic sectors, agriculture, forestry, or urbanization, or whatever. So we have been moving significantly to that direction. And in a way, I mean, that, and it comes to Solomon's first question also, and then how do you then get countries incentivized to do this and the enabling, working on the enabling environment. And I think that, really the thing is that you should, again, evaluative evidence shows that you can be more successful in reaching your environmental objectives when you work on the institutional and regulatory frameworks and when you link it to productive sectors. So you also can't work only with the ministries of environment, for example. You have to work with the productive sector ministries, whether it's agriculture or infrastructure or industry or mining or whatever. The time delay issue is a challenge, but and therefore I think one of the important things is that you should not only focus on the ultimate. I mean, your goal is to stop climate from changing and save the species and stop forest loss and so on. Obviously, that's your raison d'etre. That's why we are doing this business. But you have intermediate outcomes that we know, based on evidence, we know will increase the likelihood of this happening. And if you focus on those market change, and I'm repeating myself on these regulations and so on, but when you know that these things are happening, so you can be more certain that the actual environmental change will follow. So I think that's my best answer for that. Yeah, so who evaluates the evaluators? And well, in the flippant answer would be that the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and that the evaluations are used, and that our evaluation unit was the only unit that actually got a budget increase in this replenishment negotiation and so on. But that's too much blowing my own horn. And we do need to have there's a couple of mechanisms for peer review of evaluations. And the three main entities that promote are the OECD DAC evaluation network, the evaluation cooperation group of the international financial institutions that met earlier this week in Shanghai, and I'm just coming from there, and the UN evaluation group that brings together the UN agencies. And there was 5 years ago, so I joined 4.5 years ago, and when I joined, there was a fresh peer review of the evaluation function, which was extremely helpful for me, obviously. And we have our board meeting in a couple of weeks' time, and in my work program for next year, I am proposing to have an external peer review of the evaluation function. Of course, we'll see. I mean, we of course know some of the weaknesses that we have, but it's very, very useful to get an external perspective. And because the biggest challenge is always utility of evaluation. You can do perfect studies, like we have done. We've done a wonderful impact evaluation, although Joe might criticize the methodology, but a wonderful impact evaluation of the protected areas work and so on. But it took more than 2 years, and it cost $1 million to do the evaluation. So it became, by necessity, kind of a historical document and summation of what had happened and what the impacts were. And it was useful in that sense because was a huge investment area for GEF since the early 90s. But we are trying to get more into also formative evaluations. There's new programs, new programmatic approaches that the GEF has been initiating and so on. So we try to be at the earlier stage and evaluate the designs and evaluability per se, but also how the processes are and how and so forth, so that you can be quicker and maybe not always equally thorough in your analysis, but but you feed in directly. And this was actually interesting in this ECG meeting in Shanghai, that this came from many. It came from the World Bank, it came from the Asian Development Bank, it came from other agencies also, where they had also concluded that quick and dirty is sometimes better than a fantastic academic piece. Sorry, that was a long answer. Is there anybody else?
Yeah, Jerry. 1 second.
Thanks a lot, Juha and Joe. We're struggling on the complementarity between GEF and GCF, and I do recall that there was a study done on complementarity. I don't know if the IEO did it, and I saw the GEF 7 programming paper with the sprinkling of the term GCF. What would be your advice to us to pursue or to strengthen that complementarity?
Thanks, Jerry.
Well,
Let's take a minute. Yeah. And sorry, if you could introduce yourself.
I'm Chivesa from DMA. My question is, how successful has your latest replenishment been compared with your previous ones in terms of the amount of money raised? And what are the key lessons that you've learned from the series of replenishment processes that you've been through?
Joseph.
Thank you. My name is Joseph from IEO. With regard to the evaluations that are done by the implementing entities, how does the GEF-IEO assure the quality of those evaluations? And what do you do if in a particular organization the quality of evaluation is particularly poor? What do you do?
Thank you. Great question.
Okay. Jerry, I'm not sure I can answer that very well, but so we did look into the little bit from the comparative perspective of basically from the GEF perspective. So what should our niche be? And really, it's the fact is that it's the fact that GEF is good at working with governments on these policy issues, enabling environment, and doing some pilots here and there. But we don't have the investment money, so I guess the prevalent thinking would be that we could be involved in the earlier phases of projects, and then GCF could come in with a more heavy approach later, or do something like that. I think that's kind of the best answer I can at this stage give.
Juan, sorry, not to put you on the spot, but yeah, Juan actually has been working a lot on the complementarity and coherence. We'd love to hear what you're finding as well. So, not to put you on the spot, but at some point, let's have a chat.
Yeah. You want to say something now, or?
I guess I'll just keep it extremely brief. I really wasn't expecting to. But I mean, I think in line with what you just said, I guess there's certainly some clear opportunities for scaling up of successful, and especially as we're thinking of trying to maximize impact in our first, will be the upcoming programming process. One logical place will be to try to identify GEF projects that have had a successful, that show potential for large-scale impact, and then try to scale them up. But we have actually been engaged with people in your team who have been trying to look at these questions. What does to scale up means? Does it just mean adding a zero at the end of the project budget and just make everything 10 times bigger? Or where are the opportunities for leveraging? And that's part of the conversation. As people might know, we launched a partnership with the GEF, precisely what we're calling coordinated engagement between countries that were prepared to step up and that were interested to look at opportunities for scaling up and for doing coordinated programming between GEF 7 and us. We have around 15 countries that have expressed interest and are now in the process of following up. But it's like it's a process where we're having to hold hands because we ourselves cannot tell them what does to scale up mean, what's the best way to do it, what do you set in place so that you make sure that you have the necessary learning and the necessary evaluation to be able to scale up a project without creating a 3-year gap between the conclusion of the project and the time that you bring it here, because that will be enough to kill the gains from a previous project. A lot of these questions are still open.
Thanks very much. That's very interesting.
Yeah, and Juha, we just finished, the IEO just finished a readiness evaluation. We looked at it in the context of how well are countries, how well is GCF concentrating on building complementarity and coherence on the ground with other similar agencies. Clearly, GEF is a big player there. And our evidence was patchy. So at least at the country or subnational level, that's not happening a lot. And it's really up to leads within countries and the focal points and the extent to which they want to build this coherence and complementarity. So I think Jerry's question is really pertinent because clearly there's a need for greater leadership between institutions rather than relying on countries to take the complementarity and coherence forward. And there's a need for this overall leadership, I think, coming from institutions, which is also important to underscore.
But who's the lead?
Yeah, I agree.
There is no lead.
But first,
Is it us?
whoever, clearly it's a space that needs to be taken and owned.
So far, we have obviously accredited entities. That in the early experience of those projects that have been scaled up, it's been the accredited entities, the ones who took the lead, particularly the UNDP type, who are the ones who took adaptation fund projects or GEF projects and brought them here to scale. So right now, that will be the answer, is accredited entities, but I don't think that's the answer we want for the second phase of replenishment.
If I can add,
Dimitri, one second.
just to inform you that indeed, I don't think I need the microphone.
No, you should, because we are
We are already de facto scaling up some GEF projects. I mean, I remember one of the first projects that was approved was in Malawi and was scaling up a GEF project. So yes, I mean, the connection here is definitely the accredited entity. And we asked at that time if it was an evaluation to please bring forward what works and not what doesn't.
Okay, fantastic.
And that's, I think, the practical connection on the ground.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and the question is, of course, I mean, scaling up or broader reduction, it can take many shapes. It can be, you replicate it all over in the same, all over the country if it's successful and done in one province, or you can just scale it up for different kinds of mechanisms. Realize that we are soon running out of time, so I try to answer these two other questions, and maybe on this project evaluation thing first. I don't know if your question was about the quality assurance of the project level evaluations. Yeah, that's a great question. So we have 18 implementing agencies, and every single one of them has a different evaluation mechanism. We, of course, have given them minimum standards and guidance and terms of reference for terminal evaluations and so on. But let's say that UNDP has a country offices who are in charge of commissioning these evaluations, and they do their independent evaluation office does a bit of a quality assurance, but it's a desk study. So the quality varies quite much depending on country office often. The World Bank has their similar system with the implementation completion reports that are quality assured by the independent evaluation group. And that's, I think, a little bit more systematic thing. UNEP evaluation office does all project evaluations themselves. And then you have a bunch of these newer agencies that don't actually have any strong evaluation mechanism at all. So it varies very much, and we really try to. This is in our work program, and it's actually been asked for by both the council and the management. Is that can we actually go and look at these systems and do some field verification of projects, and so you have some agencies that have consistently really high ratings. And in the World Bank, a few years back, the rating suddenly dropped. And it's not that they started doing worse projects. It was that the IEG set harder standards on the quality assurance. So you have these issues, and we do have to. So one thing is the upfront thing that we have the guidance for terminal evaluations, but then we have to do this quality assurance afterwards. On the replenishment, so the highest replenishment ever was the GEF 6 that just ended, which was $4.3 billion. And these replenishment negotiations last year, or actually until April this year when the replenishment was confirmed, were tough. And there were lots of uncertainties, and we were quite concerned at some point of time. But so it successfully came to $4.1 billion, so just little bit lower than the previous period. So we were very, very pleased with that, actually. It was very closely tied to the, what should GEF do in the next phase. So there were during 1 year, so there were 4 successive replenishment meetings where the discussion was not about the money. The money came only in the last meeting. The discussion was about what should the GEF do, and there was the Secretariat's vision, and there was our evaluation, and quite big discussions. One was, for example, fundamentally about the climate change issue. And the Secretariat proposed to reduce the climate funding quite significantly because of you. And some donors resisted this, and it was a compromise that it went down somewhat. And it's gone down. I mean, I think 20 years ago it was about half of the program, and now it's maybe 20% of the program on climate. So it was driven by the substance, which was nice, and then in the last meeting, so there was a Stroman budget, which was based on 3 scenarios. If we get, 3.9 billion, 4.1 billion, 4.5 billion, and then, allocated lines for every, and in that case, it's of course a zero-sum game. And it was really quite interesting because it was a public haggling about where should the money go and what should the GEF do and how much should go to the private sector mechanism and how much should go to capacity development, and then lines were scrapped and some portfolios increased and some downgraded and so on. So end is well, all is well, but it was interesting.
I'm going to thank you so much, Juha. I'm going to permit one question because our friend has been waiting for a while. So, and then we'll close, please. Lillian.
All right. So my name is Lillian from the Portfolio Office of Portfolio Management. My question is dovetailing on what I think Joseph asked about project evaluation and a bit of what you said about replenishment. As you know, GCF is still building up its systems and standards, for example, evaluation, etc. I wonder if you could speak briefly to your experience on how the IEO and the GEF Secretariat have managed the synergies in terms of developing the standards and operationalization of those ones, and how you've been able to also to manage and maintain the independence, the checks and balances of that at the same time. Because I think that's the phase we're also getting into. If you could just give from your experience.
Yeah, so historically we came from the monitoring and evaluation unit in the Secretariat. And so we've had and we still have actually a unified monitoring and evaluation policy. But not for long. Now to that. So the division of labor is basically that the corporate scorecard, the results framework, the indicator framework, and monitoring, including midterm evaluations of projects and so on. That is the Secretariat responsibility. And our responsibility is vis-a-vis the higher order of evaluations and setting the standards and trying to do quality assurance of that. And then on top of it, conducting these evaluations that I've been talking to. So that's how the division of labor itself is. We now started revising the monitoring and evaluation policy together with the Secretariat. And I'm afraid we came to some very difficult issues in that case and decided to go our own ways. So there will be now a monitoring and RBM policy and a separate evaluation policy. Because they are, M&E rolls off the tongue so easily because we've been talking about it for 30 years or whatever, but they are really two different functions in many ways. And I mean, there are all these slogans about, that monitoring as a management function is then that, see that whether we are doing things right with evaluation and then ask whether we are doing the right things. So it's a different perspective on the same issue in many ways. So that is the short answer in a way, and it's not always easy to find these balances. The independence has been established over the years since 2004, and of course it wasn't a given immediately either, and there was a lot of back and forth. But now it's, even when I came to the office 4.5 years ago, so it was absolutely clear that the management and the CEO and the Secretariat were absolutely clear that that we are totally independent and not accountable to them and so forth. So took a few years probably, but that was luckily before my time.
Yeah, and Lillian, you'll have an opportunity actually to chat with you at 3 o'clock, so we sort of facilitated that, and it's such a great opportunity there. And I think just as an overview, I think we have an opportunity here as a fund to create and hopefully leapfrog into a different sort of culture as well. Learn, with all humility, of course, from the GEF, but also from other institutions. And I think we have that advantage that we can look at experiences across the world and also craft a culture that is our very own. So I think that's the attempt here, and I'm really hoping that we all do this together.
So maybe just one more thought is on this, that I think a fundamental thing for evaluation is not only the accountability for the results, and and monitoring helps with that and so on, but it's really the learning, and we focus increasingly on developing evaluations that are intended to be learning products they can be, like I said earlier, formative at the very early stages of while programs are still being developed and under implementation, or then later on, but to try to focus, like in the study, on the transformational change, to really analyze how can we do better, what are the lessons for doing things better in the future.
Thank you, Juha. Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to encourage you to do two things. First, please tweet. There's a handle for GEF IEO, which is at GEF_IEO. There's also GCF_eval. Please also use GCF News. And please tweet Juha's talk. It'll be available as a recorded webinar on the IEO website. And I have to confess, I suffered from a senior moment at the beginning of this talk, which is that I said that this was the last talk. It was definitely the best talk. Yes. But this is not the last talk that the IEO will have. And in the middle of December, we will have a talk on machine learning, where our colleagues from the College of William and Mary will be coming and talking to us about how we can use machine learning for learning, for evaluations, and for doing our work better, faster, smarter, which is, incidentally, Juha, is the slogan of the IEU, faster, better, smarter. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.